Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Clarissa and to Lauren and to Toe Times for having us present today. I want to start off by thanking our day 2 sponsor, National Interstate Insurance, and also thank you to our session sponsor, Brown & Brown of Lehigh Valley. I am Dina Sinarchia with Procore Consulting and Solutions, and we are a kind of disaster planning and response group that can assist with commercial property insurance claims. And my colleague Dave Mystic is on, who's going to be taking over a lot of the presenting duties, talking about the disaster planning and business continuity.
Okay. Thanks so much, Dina. So good day, and thanks everybody for taking the opportunity to spend some time with us and explore the concepts of business continuity and disaster response and how it applies to the towing and recovery industry. So we hope to give you some insights into planning and motivate you to either begin the planning process or improve any planning process that you might have. So for more than 35 years, I've been engaged in disaster planning, restoration, claims consulting, business continuity planning, and have a long relationship with our friends here at Procore. I've been an evangelist for continuity planning and disaster planning, just based on my own business experiences, owning property in a variety of different businesses, and experiencing having disasters occur to them over an extended period of time. So my obsession for this all really began about 25 years ago when I was finishing renovating a building actually in Pittsburgh. And one night getting ready to go to bed, I turned on the television and saw flames coming out the roof of my 16-story building. So I promptly picked up the phone and called my compadres and sent my crews that direction. And while I'm getting dressed, I see the local media person interview my nighttime superintendent, who says, "I told Mr. Mystic not to store those toxic chemicals in the building, that something terrible was going to happen." A great moment. As I'm in the car driving there, I turn on the all news radio and have them interview my front desk person who's worked there for about 5 days, who answers and says, "Well, we've never really had any disaster training or disaster drills." And in that moment, I felt a lifetime of goodwill and community effort and outreach and things we had done to build our business and build our brand kind of go swirling down the drain. And that was a moment where we knew we were going to commit to do this for our business and to share that with other people.
Okay. So just a little bit about our group. We handle both pre-loss and post-loss services. So a lot of today we're going to talk about the pre-loss business continuity plan. So to, before anything happens, try to make sure all of your plans are in order. We can also assist with asset planning, business interruption valuations. We can review your insurance policy, any sort of those kind of things. And then also when the loss does happen, our group is here to assist with that as well, putting together your claim, helping you walk through your insurance policy alongside your insurance broker, and communicate with the carrier in an assortment of different areas of coverage, from a construction loss down to property losses, fraud, employee theft, and kind of really hit the gamut of everything, both pre-loss and post-loss, kind of before the disaster occurs and then after, to get you back up and operational as soon as possible. It's always our goal. And just one other thing, just kind of feel free to add comments and questions during our session, and at the end we'll address all of the questions.
All righty. So in Chinese, the word crisis comprised of these two characters, one on the left taken from danger and the other one on the right taken from opportunity. And hopefully one of the things you'll take away from this session today is that responding to disasters, being prepared for them and properly responding to them will help you survive those moments in your business, but it will also help you to thrive in your business and creates an opportunity, because those organizations who can continue to operate in the midst of, be it a building specific or a regional disaster or a national disaster, those who can continue to serve and operate, improve their brand, improve their goodwill, and improve their standing in the community. So just the basics here for a moment. And what is a disaster? And it comes in all different shapes and forms, but essentially what we're going to talk about today is any type of calamitous event that causes a business interruption for you, causes you to veer away from your normal business operations. And in business disasters, it can take a lot of different shapes and times. And we're going to talk about how it impacts you in your personnel, your finances, your operations, and your branding, all from our wonderful School of Hard Knocks. So a little disaster factoid for you. 3% of all business interruptions are attributed to natural disasters. Those tend to be the things that are the big news items, and we see more often. But we also know that 40% of businesses that experience a natural disaster never reopen. So failing to be able to stand yourself back up, to retain your employees, to continue to operate can lead to a very early demise. Here's just a little overview of the frequency of disasters by types that kind of clues you into IT disasters, utility failures, deliberate events, software failures. I know you had a very good cybersecurity session a little bit earlier, but those are all different types of disasters that can occur, and really encourage you to take a broad look at what impacts they may have on your business. So ultimately, disaster planning is really, I think of it as a roadmap for managing through chaos. It really gives you a guide while things are occurring, because you've thought about those things in advance. It helps you to create protocols, identify responsibilities, and really get your organization in tune so that every decision during an emergency doesn't have to be a process of starting, analyzing, stopping, starting again, but really there's a continuity of process. And you'll hear me say more than one time, the goal is for you and your crew and your staff to really have unconscious competence, that when an event happens, you know how you're going to respond. I think this is a great quote that really talks about synthesizing all of these pieces. So at the end of the day, it's really the integration of emergency response, crisis management, IT recovery, claims management, supply chain, and security management, all rolled up in a ball. They all have different parts to play in putting together your plan. And when we talk about plan development, you'll see why we encourage you to have people from different parts of your operation, resources outside of your organization as well that can bring expertise to the table and helping put together a plan. So what are the ultimate goals here? We want to protect people from injury and loss of life, be they our employees or our customers, or community in general. Minimize the potential property damage or loss, minimize the business interruption. And number 2 and number 3 here, let me just talk about them for a second. We know that when there is a significant business disruption, the way we respond and how quickly we respond will impact both the duration of that downtime and the costs associated with that downtime. By having protocols and responsibilities, it will make sure that there are not redundant decisions, that people are not making multiple expenditures for the same things. So it really puts arms and a fence around the size and shape of what that potential disaster might be. Also, as we say, it maintains the general business continuity and makes sure that you can continue to serve your community at large. So over these years, we found that there are basically 4 stages of denial that people don't want to plan, and really COVID-19 has brought this all home to roost this year. But for decades, people will say, well, it won't happen, or if it does, it's not going to happen to me. If it does, it won't be that bad. And really, if it's that bad, then there's nothing I can do about it to stop it anyhow. So why should I even have any concern about it? So let's look at these a little bit differently. And knowing that today's life and times, we see a variety of disasters occurring out there. We see things like our COVID experience this year that we couldn't even fathom, we couldn't imagine for a very long time. So it's time to open up our minds, have a good look at our business operations, and look downstream at what the potential problems might be coming our way. So related to this denial, there are 6 myths of disaster planning. So let's have a look at those. As we said, number 1 won't happen. Well, we know that's not the case anymore. Number 2, planning takes too much time and costs too much money. And for many years, this was a common belief. And there's still some confusion over the essential elements of disaster planning and business continuity. However, experts in the field have led organizations to believe that planning was like some special secret art form, that we had to be highly skilled and trained and have a PhD, and only people who were anointed experts and hidden behind the green screen in Oz, only they could produce it. That the average man or woman was incapable of doing that. Well, now we know times have changed. Technology is really just completely altered the game plan and the battlefield and the opportunities here. And so with information being much more readily available and easier to be shared, technology's improved our communication, improved access and response. So these days, successful planning can really be accomplished with a reasonable commitment of both internal and external resources. And as we go through this today, you'll get a very broad picture of it. And what the last thing I want you to do is be overwhelmed or be intimidated by it. The most important thing that I want to leave you with today is to start. Take a bite of the apple, do a little bit, because all those little pieces will add together to give you a meaningful plan. So there are frequent comments that you'll hear among business people that says, planning is an expense with no return on investment. But truthfully, the return on investment comes over the ownership lifespan of the business. Your investment might range from a couple $100s of staff time to $10,000, depending upon the size and scope of your business. However, you can be assured that your investment will bring you double-digit returns in the long run when it functions for emergencies, disruptive events, and disasters large and small. So, and it may also make you eligible for special credits from your insurance carrier as you improve your risk ratings as well. Next, one size fits all. Well, this fallacy is very common among both large and small businesses alike. It's true there are certain common elements to practices and procedures, emergency response. However, all procedures have to be viewed through the lens of your company's specific characteristic, your size, your shape, your location, your equipment, your number of employees. Perhaps the worst example of one size fits all, if you remember, was BP's disaster plan for its operations in the Gulf of Mexico that contained language addressing the implications for the sea lions. That was a little oops. One size doesn't really fit all. Some basic reflection of your company's idiosyncrasies will give you a good agenda for discussion as you create or modify your plan. Next, one and done. Well, planning is a journey and not a destination. If your organization has a plan, when was it created? When was it last exercised or reviewed? Consider the types of changes that might occur after you put a plan on the shelf. Have you had staff changes? Have you had changes to equipment or vehicles or building systems? Have you modified access? How about, has your insurance carrier or the covered perils changed? Has your community's emergency response protocols changed? All these items and more drive home the necessity for maintaining and exercising and updating plans. So do not lull yourself into a complacent coma and deny the necessity for vigilant updates. Schedule periodic reviews as you would schedule employee reviews or budget updates, and really work hard to make it part of your plan. It can't be perfect, so why try? This always just makes me like pause and take a deep breath. We were once doing a disaster planning seminar and someone raised their hand and said, well, you know, our legal counsels advise us not to have a plan because if we don't have a plan and something goes awry, we can't be held to be in conflict with our plan or that we didn't go through it in a proper manner. And really my comment to that was it's time to get a new attorney. So your plan will most likely never be perfect, but in every minimal disruption may trigger a little tweak, but you've got a responsibility to create it and update it and execute it. I'm insured, so why worry? Well, the odds are that you'll never fully recover all your financial losses in a major disaster. A study by a major insurance carrier in the last decade found on average that even the best prepared companies were only able to recover 78% of the cost of their loss. Think about that for a minute. The best prepared may still come up short. So what do you think that shortfall would be for your business and your current state in this economy? You can see how a major loss can lead to catastrophic business failures. And in today's financial climate, it's increasingly difficult for companies to survive the economic downturn brought on by significant business interruption. So you must be aware of changes to your risks and your covered perils. Are you really insured for the events you think? What about your cyber coverage and liabilities? Many brokers themselves struggle with their knowledge and expertise around these issues. How about business interruption and extra expense coverage? Do you understand the differences? Do you have the correct limits? And let's talk about your building operations. If your building's more than a few decades old, do you have law and ordinance coverage for it? These are all part and parcel of the issues that you need to consider and understand when you're thinking about your current insurance coverage and your protection. So what are the common pitfalls? A lot of people in putting together their disaster plans are focused solely on the IT side of the business, but there's more to it because when it's a flood, when it's a hurricane, when it's a mudslide, those things will all cause you to address different issues that will protect specific processes in your organization. So failing to review and update your policies can also lead to surprises when it is time to file a claim. Failing to update and communicate the disaster plan to the management, staff, and team. Updating is vitally important. It's not a one and done. You have to keep current on changes you've made to your building and your equipment. Expecting the government to ensure you can reopen, well, we know that we're really largely in our own hands. We can get some assistance, but we know that on large scale disasters, we have to have thought about the resources we need in order to survive. Lastly, assuming that the claims adjuster is going to prepare your case and make your case. As my friend Frank Russo always says, own your claim, be your own advocate, work hard to put together the necessary parts for filing a claim.
And Dave, that last point is huge, that, you know, a lot of people really do believe that the insurance adjuster is there to help them. And while some are and some are very good and helpful, their job is not to put your claim together. Their responsibility is to review the claim on behalf of the insurance carrier side. So you really want to take that into your own hands, and dictate what you should be doing and what is best for your business. And it is always best to get your revenue from your clients as opposed to the insurance carrier. They do take deductions and all sorts of other things. So as you said before, better to get it from your get reimbursed because you've done a proper business continuity plan than waiting for insurance to pick that up
Absolutely.
later.
I should have "Own Your Claim" tattooed on my forehead. It just seems so simple, but it's really that important. You've got to ultimately be responsible for putting all those parts and pieces together, and having consulted with your folks in advance to understand what your potential business interruption numbers might be, and understand what extra expense you might need to be making yourself or making it available to you. So can't say enough about that. But ultimately here to look at the planning process, we're concerned about people, property, and processes. Let me just take a second to talk about people for a minute, because I think this often goes underestimated when people are doing disaster plans. We're always so focused on the physical property or the customer facing side of the business and systems. But I think it's really a dire, urgent need to think about the dollars and cents that you have invested in your staff. And if for some reason you have a disruption and you are put out of business for some extended period, the odds are people are not going to stay put, not knowing where life is taking them, where the next dollar is coming from, when they're coming back to work. So having a good plan not only is a commitment to your financial longevity and survivorship, but it's also a commitment to the people that work for you, that says to them, we care about you. You are who we are in this business. And you have huge financial stake in finding people, training people, retaining people, and you don't want to add that cost and that exposure to the total cost of any disaster that you experience. So what are the initial steps? Really, I take out a tablet, get a sheet of paper and pen, open up your laptop and think about, what are your objectives? What are you trying to get out of this? What constraints do you have, either in terms of time or money, to address putting a plan together? Give yourself a timeline and figure out what data and intelligence you need to gather. And really, this seems like this may be like a very highbrow view, but you can really begin this on your tablet. You can take out a group of index cards and work on it. The most important thing is to begin, to start thinking about these issues, making a list of them. Nobody at the end of the day knows your business better than you know your business. There are a lot of consultants for disaster planning, and among them ourselves. But anytime that we go into a specific business, the first thing we do is listen, because no one knows what it takes to open your doors and operate every day better than you. And so encourage and engage your people in working on putting it together. So let's talk for a second about what types of losses you might have. And it could be human loss, physical loss, financial losses, operational problems, and pitfalls. But those really are the core types of losses. So as we begin the planning process, we're going to do this business impact analysis. And don't be intimidated by the sense of what it is. Really, what we're doing in business impact analysis is we're looking at what are the critical operations that we need for the organization to continue to operate, whether it's the phone system, our IT system, our particular equipment, but what are the things that we need every day in order to operate? And if we are taken down by a disruptive event, what is that going to cost me on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? And that helps you to identify the risks and what each of those risks may mean to you in terms of financial impact to your business. So again, what are those processes? What are the alternatives for restoring those processes? If your IT system doesn't come back up online, how are you working around that? Do you have an alternate solution for processing payments or taking paper documents? So, look at and think about what's available, what may not be available, and how you're going to continue to operate in those different scenarios. Talk about risk for a second. In this business impact analysis, you're going to look at the risks that your business is exposed to. And basically, there are 4 approaches to looking at particular risks for your business. You can eliminate the risk, reduce the risk, insure against it, or simply say there's nothing I can do, and that's how it's going to be. But for every particular risk, you have to look at it through this frame and know what that means to you and your business, especially. The secondary steps really after assessing your overall risk is, looking at what you can do about them or not do about them, and then developing your strategy. So in this part of the program, you're really looking at what are the particular responsibilities that I need people to do to respond to these disruptive events. And really what we usually try to create is a cross-referenced matrix that says, here are our people, here are our external vendors or service suppliers that are part of what make our business run on a daily basis. And here are their responsibilities during any type of disruption. And that really gives us a matrix to begin to develop from a strategic and particular responsibilities and guidelines. Lastly, once that's occurred, we're looking at testing and maintaining the plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go down the path here. So who should be on the disaster planning team or business continuity? I'm not sure what that was. Excuse me if you're hearing that on your end. So who is on the disaster planning and business continuity team? And this by no means is an exclusive list of who may be a participant, but could be the owners, should be the owners, perhaps the operation manager, dispatch. If you're large enough to have an HR manager or someone responsible for it in the organization, safety coordinator, IT manager, the controller, drivers, people doing internal audit, key vendors and suppliers, and actually members of the community disaster response team. All of those people have a little different perspective of events that as they unfold, they'll have critical input to you. They'll bring different perspectives, and you can always look and consider other people that may not be apparent at first blush to you, who can contribute to the effort, but should be part of that disaster planning program. So there's 4 phases of planning. Really, preparedness. Again, looking at the plan, what we can do to mitigate those risks, what the response protocols and procedures are, and what you can do once an event happens to recover as quickly as possible. So let's look at those short list of important components for this. So let's talk about the communications. At the core, I think, of any and all disaster planning and business continuity plans is good communications. If you don't have a methodology to overcome losses of your landlines, your cell lines, going to text, using email, utilizing social media, whatever it is, they're all core pieces of communication. And today, with alert protocols that can send mass notifications out to all your employees, there are a lot of options available to us, but communications is absolutely, I feel, at the heart of any disaster planning program. Number two, IT access. And we know, as we've gone through here in these last 6 months working through COVID, what it now means to work remotely. And it wasn't maybe as easy as everyone expected it was going to be. But what has remote working done in terms of being productive, sharing information, working through new procedures in the organizations? What did we all do before Zoom became something that we talked about a half dozen times a day? Other things might be the necessity for alternate locations. If you've had a natural disaster occur, or civil unrest, or a chemical spill, or some type of environmental issue, perhaps you can no longer operate at your current location. And whereas you might be able to farm out, work remotely, perform a lot of your functions, in your business, you still have the necessity for parking, storing, managing your own vehicles as well as other vehicles. So alternate locations, I think, is a key piece in thinking about the disaster plan here as well. Emergency protocols and things like fuel availability, which I admit caught me off guard a number of years ago working in Florida, doing a lot of work after the hurricanes. And when fuel is not readily available, you have to make sure you've got some plan for bringing it to you, whether it's a fuel service. But, in Florida, one of the interesting things they've done in the last 10 or 15 years is require all of the gas stations to have backup generators to be able to continue to pump. But if you're part of the country or wherever you live and operate, if that's not a typical standard or expectation, you need to make sure that whoever you're using for fuel, for example, has a theory about how they're getting the fuel out of the ground and into your vehicles for you. Site access. How are you getting into your site? Who has the keys and codes? Will you be able to get to your property after a large natural disaster? You can't always take those things for granted. I suggest it's important to you in whatever city or town you operate in that you've had some communication with the public officials asking what they are going to require after a major incident for you to be able to access your property, and understand what they will want in terms of credentials for people to be able to identify themselves, and who might be necessary to appeal to in order to get access to your property. We worked after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans for several insurance companies. And one of the biggest challenges we had of providing emergency services to their clients was getting access to the site, is finding people who had been evacuated and knowing how to find the keys, find the codes, and find all the other critical information for those particular buildings. So site access is very important. Same thing with equipment access. Site safety, PPE availability. I know there was discussion earlier today as well about PPE availability. It's not going to leave us. It's an important part of what we do. And I think it's incumbent upon us as we look at our plans to make sure that we've taken consideration of what we have available and have someone in charge of checking on that, maintaining minimum levels of acceptable equipment. A number of years ago, we did a consulting for a group of hospitals in the Midwest. And it was interesting as we went through exercises and we got to a section talking about PPE availability. And we're talking about, Tyvek coveralls and respirators. And in a group of 27 hospitals, everybody's solution was to go to the same industrial supplier for equipment. And we took a little pause and picked up the phone and called the supplier and said, "Hi, we would just like to know, in whatever city this was, I'll go nameless, what's the availability if I called you today and said I needed 500 units of this or 1,000 units of that?" And you could look around the table and see everyone's jaw drop and go to the table, and they realized that because they were all relying on the same sole source provider, they had all really put themselves further at risk. So health and safety considerations, again, today more than ever. How are they operating? Do your people have basic training and understand OSHA protocols? Do you ever have people working in respirators or in situations where there may be a hazardous material at the site? And have they been fit test for the respirators and done the medical clearance for it? So all little pieces of liability management. The next thing I'd like to talk about is vendor contingency planning. I'm sure in your business, you've got a core group of 10, 15, 20 suppliers or service companies that you rely on a regular basis. But you need to have a conversation with them in advance that says, hey, if we have a regional event, how do I stand in your line of service? If you go from having 20 deliveries a day to 100, if you go from 50 work orders a day to 250, what's your plan for continuing to survive and thrive and being able to serve us? And perhaps that means that the key vendor will bring in supplemental vendors from a bigger regional basis. But you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you have some key vendor or service provider who is not able to hang in there with you and continue to supply you or service you, that can be your Achilles heel. Lastly, next to last year, I want to talk for a little second about disaster restoration company for property. We all know the big names who are involved in this business around the country. I had a business in restoration work for 35 years across the country. And the one thing I will tell you is that when it comes to property damage, fire, flood, hurricane, tornado, all those parts and pieces, I've been a general contractor, I've been a restoration contractor. The restoration contractor brings a lot of services to the table. And so it's important to understand what services they can provide, to meet with them in advance, understand the services, their insurance coverages, their training, most importantly, what their contracts look like and what their pricing looks like. The first time that you meet them, you do not want it to be 3 o'clock in the morning when you've got 30 inches of water because the creek beside your office is now running through your reception room. So pre-qualify these people. They can be immensely helpful in recovering quickly from an event, but you want to set the issues, set the table, understand those criteria before you need them. Do your homework in advance. It'll pay off in spades for you ultimately. Lastly, I want to talk about media issues, and sort of goes back to my beginning story about how we got involved in this business. But I think it's very important to be clear with your employees about who can speak, who can't speak, and managing social media. I know it kind of seems crazy with the million things that you're doing and running your business if you're a small business owner, but it's important for people to know that you're in business, that you're continuing to operate and putting information out there however you may be able to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. Let's have a look at what basic building information that you should have on hand. So for your offices, if you own the building, things that are important to know: basic building types, floors, exits, what kind of building systems do you have? What kind of heating and air conditioning equipment do you have? What kind of compressor systems do you have? You might want to have information on the age, the architect, the engineer, what your most recent valuation of the property was. And here's an important piece of the puzzle. I think that we need to take a second to talk about: photos. Take photos of your property. Take photos of your property every year. Take inside, take outside, take equipment photos. Because when bad things happen to you and something's damaged and you need to file a claim, you want to have a record of what that looked like before the event happened. So be proactive. You know, if you've got kids in the family business, that can be a good Saturday project for them, having them put those photos together for you. So it's a really important piece. If you're lucky enough to have blueprints that relate to the building, having them available digitally will also prove to be a value to you on down the line. Hazardous material management. At your location, in your office, in your shops, what do you have? Are you storing chemicals that are particularly hazardous? Do you have asbestos somewhere in the building? Do you have lead paint in the building? You know, what kind of caustic materials? It's an important piece of the puzzle. And we'll talk a little bit later about sharing this information with the local officials. I can tell you a story a number of years ago working in an industrial fire in Pennsylvania where the buildings themselves were probably about 70 years old. They stored a variety of chemicals. They were old tin whistle roofs. At one point, they had a terrible thunderstorm. Water leaked through the roofs of the building, intermingled with the chemicals, caused this exothermic reaction, caught the first building on fire. The fire department showed up minutes later, fired up the hoses, threw more water on it. And what did that do? That then just blew the building up a little bit further. And so that's where you go with that. Important to share that information and have it be available out there. So equipment contents, make, model, serial number, all of these things are important that if you have a loss, having this information makes it easier to put your loss together, to fast track replacement of equipment and machinery, information about who may service your equipment and inspection dates in case there's an issue that something may have overheated or there was a performance problem that caused a fire or something to occur. These are all pieces that will help you to manage your claim, minimize your exposure, and be in much better control of the process.
Yeah, Dave, I can't echo that last comment enough. In a recent claim, golf course clubhouse burned to the ground, and it's 3 years down the road, and we're still trying to make heads or tails of their personal property collection because there were no records. New GM, and the adjuster hired a salver to come in and help put an inventory together, and they just tried interviewing everybody. And now as the club is trying to put their building back together, it's a question of, did we capture everything that was on site? And nobody knows the answer to that. And we're, trying our best, but we're positive we're missing things, or what quality of items were on site to what quality the adjustment team is assuming we had. So it's a lot of negotiation. So those photos are key, and any sort of lists of inventory and equipment really comes in very handy.
It absolutely, it can make such, if you think about the fact that if you have all of this, and these days really being able to have it digitally, and that you can go pull up your list and in 5 minutes of clicking, produce a spreadsheet that you can send to your adjuster that says, hey, I know these are the things that I lost. Here's the information that supports it. Here's photos of it. Send me that first check for $50,000 or $100,000 or $250,000. But again, it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning and owning your loss. These are things you can do to really just make life better. That's the best way I can tell you. And don't be confused or confuse this information simply with a depreciation schedule. A lot of times people say, oh, well, we got a depreciation schedule. No, that's not the same thing. Look at the information that we want here. Look at the detail that we want. This is different. It has different value. It can really be a big help to you.
And then since you mentioned depreciation schedules, it's just something to note, especially with the equipment that the group on this call is having. You know, when you put your insurance policy together and your equipment is valued at either replacement cost or actual cash value, it's a little different than your actual depreciation value internally. So if you insure it at actual cash value, yeah, you're going to get the kind of current rate for that 20-year-old piece of equipment. But if you insure at replacement cost, if you had the top of the line version at the time, and whatever today's top of the line version of that piece of equipment is, that is what you're insuring for. So it's something else to consider as part of your plan. And when you kind of compare your disaster and continuity plan to your insurance program, and understanding what you're insured for would be very helpful.
That's a great point. A great point. Let's talk for a second about the computer equipment and software and applications, and if you're using a package, a towing management systems package, those types of things. But it is still a little scary, the number of people we find who are storing all their business information and all their applications on a single desktop in their business. We recently were working with a client who had a $250 million a year business, and they were proud that they had a server room at their place, but their servers were all in the same room. There was no redundancy. There was no separate cloud storage. So really taking a few minutes and working with whoever your IT guru is, whether it's internal or external, to have a plan about how you're storing the information, where you're storing it, how you access it, and in what form the data is. I can tell you a story from a number of years ago. We were working for a clothing manufacturer in the Midwest that did $300 million a year worth of clothing and accessory sales. And these folks were in the middle of going from being a privately held company to a publicly traded company. And they had a brand new CEO. One day they had a power outage because the paver outside raised the bed on the dump truck, pulled down the power lines, knocked out the power. So the place goes black. The CEO picks up the phone and reaches the IT manager and says, well, when are things coming back up? And the IT manager says, oh, hold on, let me connect you with the facility manager. And the facility manager says, well, sir, I hate to tell you, but we don't really own an emergency generator. And at that moment, they realized that they were losing an average of $5 million an hour in sales. Now, I know you may not be having $5 million a moment in sales, but those are the types of things that happen. So what did they do? They said, well, we're going to have a plan. We're going to get some emergency generators. And in the meantime, the broker asked us to go meet with them and see if we could help them with some interim plans and some equipment in the meantime, and try to bring the prices down and help them get organized. But before they ever made that call to us, somebody put a backhoe through the internet line outside. And so twice within a matter of 2 months, they were completely out of business. And then when they did manage to get power back up, the IT manager had to be the guy to tell the CEO that although they had saved the data, it was going to take them 72 hours to reconfigure the data and import it all in order to bring the systems back up. So don't make life hard on yourself. Have a theory, consult with whoever you trust to be your service provider or your internal IT guru, and know how you can store, know how you can access. It's critically important. It goes without saying. Let's talk about professional services, and really who you might need in a disastrous event, especially a physical event on your property. So you may need access to engineers or environmental consultants, your accountant, your auditor, your CPA, safety folks, your legal advisor, your broker, your risk manager, all of them, I think, have contributions to make to you in putting together the plan, help you see the risks and your responses to them through different lenses, and just, I think, are invaluable folks to have seated at the table working through the process with you.
Yeah, and this becomes really important when you do have a loss. We always like to say, get your team in place before the loss occurs, and part of the disaster planning. But when you have your restoration company that was mentioned earlier, your claim preparation firm, your broker, and your risk manager all working together, having a legal consultant from an insurance policy perspective. One of the questions is about some of the language in insurance policies and how it pays out, but having some coverage counsel maybe just on the back burner, again, not formally engaging them and paying them a ton of money, but having everyone just know each other so that when the loss occurs, you make one phone call that starts the plan and everyone is ready to respond. And having all the contract and negotiation stuff out of the way ahead of time just lets everyone start at day one of the loss, as opposed to, even 15 days out. Again, we get involved at any point in time of a loss. So it's not to say you can't ever hire people later, but it just makes it so much cleaner and everyone's on the same page from day one, as opposed to, 20 days down the road where the adjuster's doing things that you might not have realized you're all agreed to. And part of that plan too is getting the adjuster involved from the beginning. You can have it sometimes conversations with your carrier to understand who they would name as their adjuster. And again, they work for the carrier, but they can still be part of your team and knowing, hey, you're the people that we're going to call. This is what the expectations are, and introduce them to your team. So again, from day one of your loss, everyone is on that same page.
Yeah, I can't reiterate that enough. I can tell you, we worked on a large property claim after Ike in Texas, where all these people were fragmented, had never been together. And before we got there, the environmental people had racked up, ultimately $27 million in environmental cleanup charges, only to find out that the limits were significantly lower. And someone really should have raised their hand and understood that. And there were multiple layers and they didn't all line up right. But again, this is what having the group together to have these discussions is very important. And let me talk for a second also about engineering. If you've got significant damage to the building, you want to make sure that you're engaging an engineer who comes from the forensic side, who is not simply a new design person, who isn't intimidated by what it might take to put the building back together again. So it's my own little footnote there. Let's talk for a second about government and community. A lot of times we find companies are reluctant to engage the local public safety people in helping them put together a plan. But, my experience over the years has been, whether it's the police or the fire department or the local building inspector, people are anxious to be of service and to help you and share with you, what their response is going to be, what would make life easier for them if they had to come and, respond to your property. It's really, I think, an important and often overlooked part of the process. So I will knock on wood and say in all these years, I've never seen them come in and smack their head against the wall and say, you guys are all crazy. Somehow there's something terrible here. We're shutting you down. But they're anxious for you to engage them. They look at it as part of their service to the community. I think it's a really important piece of the total puzzle. So let's talk about key service providers, and let's talk about banking and cash management. It's today it's easier with online banking than what it used to be, but cash management can be a critical issue when the fire, flood, hurricane, storm is coming to meet you at your door. So really being able to access your funds, have the cash you need, be able to continue to process transactions, all of those things I think are important consideration here at the front end of what it takes to keep the lifeblood of the business flowing. Next, the restoration contractor, we've really talked about them for a bit. Next, I'll talk about the utility companies. Who do you have for utility companies? Do you know if something happened to your building and you weren't able to be there, how you would access your account information to be able to communicate that with the utility providers? Service contractors, it goes back to my conversation a little bit earlier about what is their contingency plan? What is their plan to scale up and be able to handle the requests? And can they make a commitment to you, or will they commit to bring other resources in? But that's a worthwhile cup of coffee sitting across the desk trying to understand what may be the weak link for you. Sign makers, it may seem trivial, but in post-disastrous events, being able to hang a sign on your property that communicates to people as they drive by that you're still in business, you're still operating. Although it may seem mundane compared to the digital empire, I still think it's an important piece of the puzzle, excuse me. So the insurance broker, you got to engage them, got to keep them close, got to help them or rely on them to give you some guidance as you put together and really own your claim again. Temporary office and IT systems, we've talked about fuel services, PPE availability. I think this is all part of the bundle. You may have other things that come to mind. Just continue to make the list, but make sure you go through those and go through them with the group, because this group and all those different perspectives will see different parts and pieces of how they interact in your business. And I think one of the most valuable things in doing a business continuity plan is that at the end of the day, even if you never have a terrible disruptive event, it'll help you better understand the linkages in your business to people upstream and downstream and internally servicing your different entities in your business, as well as their outward customer facing part of the organization. So it really highlights how that chain of your business operation is put together. Media management, and whoever this is, if you're a big enough business that you have a spokesperson, that's wonderful, God bless you. If you're a smaller business, if you're a mid-sized business, you just want to identify who in the organization is a spokesperson. Because when the phone rings or somebody shows up at your doorstep and God forbid there's been some terrible event with one of your employees on the highway, or there's been an event to your building, you want one single person to deal with the television people, the radio people, the news people. Who is that person? Trust me, everybody wants to have their 15 minutes of fame, but your employees need to know this is how this works. You are not allowed to do this, but I will do that, or Joe Smith over here will do it, but one spokesperson. And that spokesperson needs to be able, in an instant, to at least be able to identify basic building facts, basic business facts. We've been here for 37 years. We've been in this building this long. We have X number of employees. Our business is from here to here. Be able to provide some basic information. Next, it's someone who's empathetic and not brushing people off, not like, why are you bothering me? What's that concern? You have a brand that you've worked hard to build in this community, and you need to take a moment, and whoever this person is, to stop and show concern and be empathetic and be communicative. Next, you want to manage rumors, and God knows these days that's a full-time job and then some, but manage rumors. And that may be people keeping an eye out for what's going on your Twitter account and social media, and you need to tamp things down. You need to put out good information, and somebody needs to provide routine updates. Don't be intimidated by this, but don't ignore this. This is a really, really important part. You've all worked hard to build businesses, and that goodwill of your business is so essential to your ongoing operation. Don't let media take you sideways and cause damage on down the path. Let's talk about the disaster planning template. So what's the best way to go at it? Really base the plan and the issues you're addressing on the risk assessment and any lessons you may have learned from prior experiences. And really, one of the things I didn't talk about in terms of who should be on the planning team, if you have people in the organization who have lived through some huge, dramatic, natural business disaster, their experience is just invaluable. And so the lessons learned that they can bring to the table, I think, are very important. Next, keep it simple. Know who your audience is. Don't make it overly complex. Trust me, we've gone to businesses where, once we were working with a hotel and they pulled 3 500-page binders off the shelf, and my eyes just rolled over in the back of my head. If it's too complex, if it's like too much like, I'll show my age and say the Encyclopedia Britannica, if it's overwhelming, people aren't going to read it, understand it, and embrace it. Keep it simple. Know who your audience is. Again, your goal is to create the plan, have people become familiar with it, exercise it, have little sample run-throughs, but you want people eventually to be unconsciously competent, that they really know what to do and don't require your direction at every moment. So you want to make sure that the recovery procedures are easy to access. We have a great photo in our library of a school in Galveston, Texas, after Hurricane Ike. And when we showed up and we asked the school administrator, we said, "Did you have a disaster plan?" And she said, "Well, we did." And she took us into her office, and on the bottom shelf of her bookshelf was a beautiful orange binder that said emergency plan on it. And she said, "Well, there you see where it is. And so you can understand what help that was to us." So make sure that people have access to it. Really today, an online solution for it, or making sure people have it in a Dropbox file or a Google Drive or something, is an important part of the puzzle. So identify alternate sites or equipment. You really want to be able to lock down, safeguard your property and equipment and your people coming out of the chute. Make sure that you update your contact information and your communications plan, again, because I think that's core, that's at the heart of the process. And make sure that you've got some solution. Make sure that you've got some solution looking forward to cash management and transaction processing. I'm not sure what that is doing to me. In-house staff capabilities. Look and see in your organization, are there any other hidden skills or abilities in your organization? This might be simple as someone that works for you who may have been trained as an emergency medical technician, and might be someone who works for you who's a multi-language speaker, but there may be someone who has worked on communications equipment. But take a little skill bank inventory of the people that work for you, understand what they bring to the table, and understand what you need to look at from outside the organization. Business insurance. I'm going to opine here for a little bit and ask Dina to please chime in with me. So things that I believe are important are understanding your perils and your coverages, making sure that you have good replacement cost of value to your property and your equipment. If you're an owner of the building, make sure that you've got code update protection, understand limits and exclusions, and understand the financial strength really of your insurer. So, Dina,
Yeah,
I'll toss it to you there for.
Sure. Yeah, we want to make sure as you're kind of addressing your continuity plan as to, what you are covered for and what you are not covered for. Kind of the best example is Hurricane Katrina. People in New Orleans were covered for the hurricane, but they were not covered for flood. So how did the water come in? The roof or the front door? So just knowing that and making sure, are you on a floodplain? Do you need flood coverage? Are you near something that could flood, and do you have that appropriate coverage is just very key in part of your continuity plan to make sure you have the right coverages in place. The replacement cost values I mentioned before, based on both your equipment and your building. Getting an asset valuation, making sure your values are correct. One of the questions we have in here is, is this able to reduce your premiums by having the plan? And the answer is yes and no. You want to make sure you have the right limits and coverage in your plan. So maybe you look at this and you say, well, the replacement value of my equipment currently is insured at $100,000, but when we actually did this continuity plan, it's going to be $200,000 to $300,000. You may up that limit, which might cost you a little bit more, but you have the right coverages if something does occur, or you at least know your risk and what your exposure is if you choose to stay a little underinsured because of the pricing. Same thing with your business interruption valuations. That could be done as well as part of this. What is your exposure if something happens? If your main location goes down, are you able to move to other locations? Same thing with your extra expense coverage. It's part of your business interruption. Dave talked a lot about having an alternate site, alternate fuel sources. So what does that actually going to cost you? Do you have a, temp generator? What does it cost to run it and the fuel for that? All of those kind of costs can be put together to make sure, do you have the right limits of coverage for that? Obviously the solvency of the insurer, just making sure it's a good reputable carrier that is able to handle a widespread loss. The fires out in California, some of the carriers have gone under in the past because they just didn't have the bandwidth to cover that many insureds at the same time.
Okay. So once again, in terms of preparing and writing the plan, keep it simple. Really use an outline format. Cross-reference roles and responsibilities, include diagrams and photos to make it easy. Provide printed copies on waterproof media if people want to have a copy of it, in the trunk of their car or stashed away somewhere. But really, at the end of the day, the cloud-based information make access easy. But in the event that it's not, having hard copies available obviously is an important part of the puzzle. So again, develop a plan with contingencies, share it with your staff, make sure that you update it based on the types of risks or events that may impact you, back it up and store that critical information and update it in a reasonable fashion. One of the things that we always recommend is to put this on the calendar, much like you would do a budget review or a quarterly financial review. If it has a place on the calendar that's tied to some event that is at routine intervals throughout the year, then you're more likely to take the time and effort to update it and make sure that it's recent information. You don't want to pull it out when you need it and realize that a third of the people don't work there anymore, or that the equipment has been replaced by something else, or gee, we moved from this location to that location and we didn't update that data in the system. So again, review and update your insurance policies. This code issue, I know I may seem like a broken record, but it is really, from my perspective, having been involved in disaster recovery and response for more decades than I want to tell you, it is one of the things that we see that cripples businesses. And let me just give you the worst example that I can share about this. Probably about 10 or 15 years ago, we were working on a high school fire in Massachusetts. And it happened in the gymnasium and impacted about 12 or 15 fire alarms, candelas, remote speakers, pieces of the fire system. So the electrician, according to the code, was able to create a separate sub panel to tie all those things into, and had a cost that was like $15,000 to do that. And when he went and presented the plan to the building inspector and met with the fire marshal said, "Son, can you look at this document and tell me what it says?" And the electrician said, "Well, that all final decisions are at your discretion." And they said, "Yes, that's what that means. And so we're going to tell you that we won't accept that solution. The only thing we're going to accept is that you completely rewire the fire detection and notification system in the building." And so instead of an expense that was under $20,000, they ended up spending the better part of $500,000 to rewire the entire building and that system. So codes are a tricky thing. And if you're in a building that's more than a couple decades old, you need to have your antennas up in terms of what your exposures might be. So again, as we said, identify and protect your assets. If you've got multiple sites, there may be a little variation or tweak that you need for each of those sites, depending upon maybe some specific geographic risk that makes one different from another. But make it easy to access, easy to exercise, and update it. So in responding to an event, once you've kind of created the sense in the organization of an elevated readiness and communication, it gets people thinking about it in advance. It kind of eases a little bit of the shock. They've been thinking about it and understanding what that process might be. So you want them, again, here we go again with unconscious competence. Engage your emergency protocols, understand what health, safety, OSHA guidelines might be in place, understand if it is an environmental event or civil unrest or an explosion or something, whether they need to evacuate or hunker down at your facility, and how you activate the core group of people who are going to be responsible for calling balls and strikes for your emergency operations team. From the recoveries end, really, once you've had an event, you need to assess the damage and document the conditions. And again, I hope that Dina will chime in here, but it's important to document, take photographs, take videos, get 3D imaging with a Matterport camera if it's a significant loss to your property, but document the conditions, document and separate out the costs to preserve and protect your property so that they're easily accessible and understandable in the claims process. Stabilize the environment, protect it from any further damage. How do you restore and bring back those basic critical processes to allow you to keep going, then not have to shut down for some extended period of time, and understand what it takes to file the claim and process the claim? And don't be digging around trying to find the phone number or your insurance information. All of that, your current insurance information should be part of the plan, and all that data that's necessary to file should be readily available and at hand. So again, contact information, as I've said several times, is it the key? How are you reaching out? Are you using a mass alert system for your people? If the telephone is down, going to, texting, but understand what your options are and agree to what those systems are, access to the facility, and an inventory of the key assets, once again, just to reiterate those pieces. So again, what are the critical processes? And identify the priority of recovering them. What's the most important thing? What do you need to focus on? Step 1, step 2, step 3, in order to get the business back up. Don't have competing challenges. You don't want someone thinking, well, the finances is the most important, and this person over here fighting and saying, no, we got to be able to keep the drivers and the equipment on the road, and somebody else says, no, we've got to think about, the physical Identify what the priorities are in advance. Everybody's on the same page, working towards the same goal. It'll knock down infighting, confusion, havoc. Trust me about this. Access to or identify your hazmat challenges and know what they are, and be able to share those with the first responders if it's a physical event. What is your access to emergency equipment? And I know for the third or fourth time, a relationship with a restoration and recovery company, I think, is critical here in the process.
Hey Dave, I know we're at about we're just over 15 minutes over our session time, so I don't know other people's schedules. So I think there's a couple questions I do want to get to, but if we have any kind of, last major points we want to hit, so we can kind of start to wrap up a little bit.
Sure. No, if we've got questions, we're glad to go to there.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions I tried to address already, are there opportunities to reduce the insurance premiums by having a contingency plan in place? And I think the general answer is yes, absolutely. When an insurance carrier knows that you are taking your risk seriously, and can see the plan that you have in place, because ultimately you're reducing their risk as well. So yes, it is for sure an opportunity to reduce the premiums by having the contingency plan. But like I said, as you dig into the plan and you address extra expenses and your rebuild costs, it could bring your premiums up a little bit if you were short in coverage from the start. And those are all discussions that you'll have with your insurance broker. I mean, Brown & Brown our broker is a sponsor of this particular session. And them and your overall team that puts the plan in place can have those conversations as to, what impacts to the premium this will have for you. Dave, do you have anything to add from a carrier perspective?
No, I think your points are well made there. And we've seen that be possible working with risk managers.
Okay. The other question was, does business interruption insurance ever pay out? Businesses spend thousands of dollars for it, and it seems like there's always a couple words in the policy that denies coverage. I will say yes, business interruption insurance does pay out. That is pretty much what I do every day for the 18 years of my career, calculating the business interruption losses. But you're right, there are always some policy language stuff that says, like I mentioned before, the water came in from above and not below. So do you have coverage for that? But in general, yes, carriers do want to pay your business interruption. There is some always issues, which is why we advise, my firm exists for that reason, to be an advocate for you, the insured, the policy holder, to put your calculation in the best light and to really think of all of the different impacts. We've had clients that, if you just look at their historical sales, and that's how you're going to project what they should have done during the loss period, but you took away a line of business right before the loss. Nothing to do with the loss, you just changed your business model. The insurance carrier is going to hire their forensic accountants, and they're going to say, well, you were already teetering down before the loss, and we're going to be able to ask you those questions ahead of time to really go, no, here's the story. And again, we keep driving home the point, own your claim. So when you tell the story, we walk them down the yellow brick road of your business and how you operate and what your what was going on prior to the loss. Were you growing? Were you decreasing? And why all of that happened? They will, start to be able to respond a little bit better, understanding your point before they start making their own assumptions as to why your business is behaving the way it did and what's attributable to the actual loss and just general market conditions. So yes, it does pay out. There, of course, is some language in there. And, when there is gray language, we do try to advise to bring in coverage counsel, and they could advise along with the insurance broker to make sure that communication is flowing and that everyone's interpreting the policy in the correct way, in the best light for you, the insured. I think so far that's the only other question. So Dave, if anyone has any more questions, please add them into the chat. And Dave, if you have any other kind of closing points that would be helpful for the continuity plan.
Sure. No, I just think that the important to remember, it's a plan, as I've said, to survive and thrive. It's worth the investment of time and energy, and it really protects your brand in the community. I know it may seem daunting, but take a bite of the apple, begin the process. It'll pay real results for you.
Awesome. So we know we have a couple links up right now for additional information. I believe Toast Summit is going to be sending our presentation out to the group along with a couple other pieces of information from the rest of the sessions. And in here, I think my contact information as well as Dave's is in here. So feel free to reach out to us if you do have any other questions or, want to bounce ideas off of the two of us. That is what we're here for. So thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it.